All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's edition of Noisy Reality. My name is Jim Dingman. We're airing the show on Sunday, March 22nd. We're very happy today to have Dr. Christian Bueger. Bueger?
Yes,
Ah, I
that's
got it. Okay. And he's a professor of international relations at the University of Copenhagen. He's in the Department of Political Science. He leads the Ocean Infrastructures Research Group and the Copenhagen Ocean Hub. He's also one of the directors of the SafeSeas Network on Maritime Security. He is an associate fellow at the Mauritius-based Charles Telfair Centre, and he's a research fellow at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. He has a long, extensive career. He has done a book that was published 2 years ago, Understanding Maritime Security, published by Oxford University Press. And for somebody who's, I should say, steeped in reading naval strategy, Julian Corbett and Albert Thermahan, it's a very enlightening, broad look at the whole concept. So we're very happy today to have Christian with us. Christian, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Well, okay, first let's talk about your take on what's going on right now with this war between the United States and Israel and Iran.
So I'm looking at this primarily from a maritime perspective, and what we're looking at is, in many ways, an unprecedented situation where one of the major choke points of the world economy is being shut down now for almost 3 weeks, and it's very difficult to see how the situation will resolve. The impact is already being felt for the global economy, and that is really a global loss event in many ways. 20% of oil and gas supplies linked to that, fertilizers linked to that, different supply chain products such as helium that Qatar produces. Qatar is a producer of about a third of global helium production. And if you think this is about balloons, well, actually it is not. It is about chip production and scanning, medical scanning, where we are looking at supply chain shortages. So in many ways, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a dramatic situation, and it's very difficult to see at the moment of how shipping can actually pass through again, but it is becoming more and more urgent. Oil prices, gas prices have spiked considerably. 2 weeks ago, a lot of analysts would say it's unthinkable that the oil price goes beyond $100, but we are well beyond that by now. So everyone needs to work towards de-escalation and finding alternatives of how to get the strait open again.
Now, you're at an international relations conference at, I assume, Ohio University, is that correct? At Columbus, Ohio?
Yes, it's the International Studies Association
Okay.
conference that is taking place right now.
What are your colleagues saying? What sort of vibes do you get from them in talking about this?
Well, it differs a little bit whether people based in the US or based in Europe or in other parts of the world. It is fully clear that this is a watershed moment that of this decade, at least, that will have long-term transformative impacts in terms of geopolitics, in terms of regional stability in the entire Middle East. And it is really of the scale of 9/11, of the COVID crisis, and so on. And I think this is really important to recognize that we are not looking at a minor regional conflict or anything like that, but at something that is really a watershed moment for geopolitics, for the global economy, and we'll keep on talking about this for the foreseeable future. This I can promise you already.
Well, and we've seen, for example, I've been looking at some of the pieces on TV talking about how the price of eggs has been affected in India by this crisis, that they are automatically getting an escalation of egg production because they can't send the eggs. Half the trade of India goes to the Gulf. So that's disrupted by this. It's an amazing global phenomena going on. Now, explain to me and our audience how you did a marvelous, interesting synthesis of many theories of maritime security and maritime strategy. How do you see this event uh, in your theoretical constructs that you came up with in producing that book with your colleague?
So basically, if we apply that more straightforwardly to the current situation, we are looking at extreme maritime uncertainty at the moment, and that in many ways calls for multilateral solutions. So it is hard to see how the current situation can be resolved by, peering towards China or the United States. It calls for multilateral solutions where either the European Union, potentially the Gulf Cooperation Council, have to work together, hopefully under United Nations umbrella, to increase the pressure on the United States and Iran. We had a very promising UN Security Council resolution that was concluded in consensus with more than 135 states actually sponsoring the resolution. That is also historic in many ways. So from a theoretical viewpoint, it's now important to see that the former maritime security arrangements that we have in the region since the early 2000s, since the war on terror, are probably going to crumble or struggle to survive. Right? To talk very briefly about the setup that we actually have in the region, we have an arrangement that is called the Combined Maritime Forces, led by the United States and the United Kingdom. And that is a 46-country partnership that has been quite instrumental in providing maritime security in that region for a long time. It was crucial in fighting the pirates off the coast of Somalia between 2008 and 2012. And since then has mainly acted against people smuggling, narcotic smuggling, that also played a role in protecting shipping against the attacks from the Houthi. If and how partnerships such as these ones will survive the current conflict, we will have to see. It is at least doubtful for now whether these old arrangements can hold. And quite obviously, one of the predictions is that there will be more focus on regional mechanisms rather than mechanisms that are led by the United States or by China or any of the big powers. So there's long-term regional impacts.
Yes, indeed. Now, when we're looking at the situation right now as we speak, we saw that yesterday both sides exchanged verbal threats. Trump talking about going after power plants, going after, and power plants could be refineries that supply potable water, desalination plants along the Gulf in Iran. And then, of course, the Iranians threatened vice versa to do the same thing. What do you make of all that? What do you make of these threats? Because unfortunately, in this country, we've learned to take his mouthing seriously because he will indeed, given any number of explanations about Trump psychologically, he will feel that he has to act on them. And we're just simply, to some, climbing up the escalation ladder. So how do you see this situation right now that we're in with these kind of threats going back and forth and the profound disturbing consequences of actually knocking out water for both sides of the Gulf? It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, we're looking at a major escalation, and we're walking into the wrong direction. And quite obviously, this has been happening now for a long time, and it's extremely dangerous. Not the least because the threat that Donald Trump put out there is out of touch with reality. Because he literally argued that the that Iran should open the straits immediately within 48 hours. But what does it actually mean in practice? Right? Let's assume Iran would declare the strait is now open from now on if there are no further missile strikes by the United States and Israel. Would it imply that shipping would go through? No, right? Because the risk is still there. We would need, for an opening of the strait, we would need a lot more security guarantees vis-a-vis the shipping industry that actually alters their risk calculation, and simple statements will not do the trick. Here, the strait will profoundly change and will require a sort of multilateral security arrangement, perhaps even something like a United Nations maritime peacekeeping operation or something along these lines to actually get it open. Further escalation will only make the situation worse and will also increase the cost that all of us, wherever we live on the planet, whether we're in United States, in India, in Europe, wherever, will have to pay. So de-escalation is basically what we need right now, but I cannot see how any of the parties is actually walking into that direction at the moment. So very, very dangerous situation. And if we're now looking at basic infrastructure being targeted, that will also imply a lot of human suffering, both in Iran, but also the Gulf region.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Now, everybody else who's on there, please raise your hands. You can jump in, ask questions to Christian, because of course I can keep going. Go on, Julian.
Hello, Professor Bueger. I was looking through your list of books. I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating topic. I teach at Concordia in Montreal, the university behind me. And one of the things I teach is naval strategy. I have two questions I was hoping you could maybe challenge me on. And the first one is, my assumption is that the reason the U.S. is able to be so aggressive is that for the first time since the end of World War II, the U.S. is 25% of the world's GDP. It's become enormously productive, whereas the rest of the world has slowed down. And so, you look at the Great Britain, whose Navy is getting very close to being the same size as Canada's. I mean, essentially, Europe is denavalizing. The U.S., I think the world GDP right now is 120 trillion. The U.S. is 30 of it. That's 25%. I mean, that U.S. hasn't been 25% since I think it was like 1950. So the U.S. is simply exercising the power it has, and with the exception of the Chinese, no one else is really building naval forces. My second question is, I'm wondering if it is a problem of insurance. I mean, how much would it cost for Trump to unilaterally guarantee all the insurance that the ships require to go through the straits? I mean, is it a matter of 200 billion? Is it $500 billion? Is it $1 trillion? I mean, how much does it cost to ensure what I think? I know there are like 2,000 tankers in the world. That obviously they don't all serve the Persian Gulf. So I'm assuming several hundred very large tankers, and I assume that some of those tankers cost about $1 billion, like the super tanker. So, I mean, could you speculate on the first issue? I mean, isn't this just a power? The Americans are exercising power that's commensurate with their wealth, and everyone else is weak. And in the second question, I mean, why don't we see state-backed insurance? Because if the straits are safe, Trump could just say, "Hey, I'll guarantee the loss, so just go through." What do you think of those?
Thank you. Two super interesting and important questions. Let's perhaps start with insurance. So quite obviously, insurance is part of the calculation of the shipping industry. And the Lloyd's War Committee has declared the area quite obviously a war risk area, but you can still buy insurance. It's just kind of like dramatically expensive. So it has more than tripled. It's now at around 8% of the value of a vessel. So this is really, really expensive. But obviously, states could take some of this risk, and in some countries, for instance, Norway, states actually do that on a regular basis. However, insurance is only one factor in the calculation. The other ones are reputation, right? Taking the risk and then the ship actually being hit is not good for your reputation and for your future market. Some clients will clearly turn their back on you, because if the ship actually gets hit, let's not forget there's also commodities on board which might be precious, and so on. The other factors are also the seafarers, right? And whether both in terms of the potential human costs, but also in terms of your impact on your labor force in the long run. If you develop the reputation as a company that takes these kind of risks, you will not get kind of like the staff that you need to run these kind of like high-tech machineries that contemporary ships actually are. So it's because of that, it's not so simple. There will always be elements of the shipping industry that are less risk averse, right? And some ships, still go through the strait. I think the average is like six, 7 ships per day, most of them linked to Iranian oil trade. But there are some high risk takers in this. But it will not be on the scale that we actually need to re-energize the global energy markets, so to say. So insurance on its own will not do the trick. And this is why I'm saying that we need some multilateral mechanism for security guarantees vis-a-vis the shipping industry. And that has to involve Iran in one way or the other, because military escorts are so limited in terms of what they actually can do. Let's not forget to go back to normal. That's like 120 ships per day. That's a lot to be protected against, missiles, against aerial drones, against surface drones, against underwater drones, and potentially even mines. And that brings me to the first question, the question of naval power. I think what we can see from this is that the naval power has become much more limited than it used to be. That was also one of the lessons of the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, that the mighty US Navy with a little European help didn't manage to stop these attacks. Yes, you could argue, well, perhaps it was not enough bombs, but no, it is also the nature of the threat has radically changed. It is extremely difficult to protect shipping against drones that are low cost, easy to launch, very easy to hide the launch pads, and so on. So all of that points to the limits of what a modern navy actually can do against these threats, and Iran is fully playing that card quite successfully. Aren't you also surprised how many missiles actually reach their targets, right? So I think the long-term lesson will also be not how powerful the US military is, but how weak it is in the end to protect allies against missile threats, protect shipping, and so on. This will be the long-term reading of all of that.
Yeah, well,
Thank you, Professor Bueger.
Thank you, Julian. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, Professor Bueger. Yeah, the heterodox economist Michael Hudson, his argument is that if you look at which countries has the U.S. Attacked in the last 30 years, you have Iraq, Libya, Syria, well, not directly, but through its allies, Yemen, or Iran now, but also Venezuela in this past year. These are all major oil producers. And so he's arguing that what this is about is an American attempt to maintain its hegemony over the world by basically controlling, oil and access to it. That again, if U.S. succeeds in, taking out Iran, or regime changing it, as their goals have been stated, that they then will use that control of oil to squeeze the rest of the world and basically impose more controlled hegemony by cutting off when necessary access to the main commodity that especially all industrial economies require. So I wonder if you can see, this war and again control of maritime, but also again of the very important, maritime shipping routes through which oil goes again, whether it's the Bar, Elban Knob in, the Red Sea, but again also of course the Straits of Hormuz. So to kind of flip it, because of course, the U.S. in recent decades has become an oil exporter. So if we think in terms of American economic power, America is benefiting from this increase in oil prices. And now America is, going to be a sought after, again, in terms of for Europe, of course, again, America has become the major, a major supplier of gas and oil to Europe, for example, where you're from. And, with an attendant, increase in America's leverage over Europe and its other allies, by providing again the oil and gas that the Middle East temporarily cannot. And of course, again, the U.S. oil companies are going to make a lot of money now. So yes, I just wonder if you can see the economic and but also political context in that sense, if that's a valid argument you think.
Thank you so much for the question. I think it's super important to actually ask what kind of rationality has been driving this war in the first instance. And the question of control over oil and fossil fuel resources is clearly one of the driving factors. So in that sense, I would agree with the analysis, and very much so. It's also about China. Let's not forget Venezuela was quite obviously one of the main suppliers for China. So is Iran, right? Interestingly enough, the shipping that still goes through the strait is to a large degree oil supplies vis-a-vis China. So it didn't work quite so well. This line of thinking, quite obviously, is also deeply problematic because it misses that we are standing at a transformation away from fossil fuels, and one of the consequences of the current crisis is, in particular in Europe, but also India and Asia, will be to invest more into sustainable energy, offshore wind, and so on. So that will, in the long run or medium run, will backfire, because the big lesson here is to diversify, to regionalize, and one of the ways of doing that is clearly to invest in green energy. Think Italy, right? Italy shifted their energy supplies from Russian gas to Qatari LNG gas, right? That doesn't look good currently, right? Gas prices in Europe have doubled. So whether this is the right set of thinking in the long run is at the very minimum questionable. And unfortunately, at least in my interpretation, much of that current war, and in particular its escalation, has not been driven by grand strategy, but is rather erratic and spontaneous and dubious, because we have never been given the full rationale of what the objectives of the war are, or when it might end, or when de-escalation might set in. So I wish it would only be about oil in that sense.
Right. But and to reinforce your argument, China has shifted, of course, in recent years to being, the number one electric vehicle producer, but also they're adding the more renewable energy than than the rest of the world combined. So they're kind of, at the head of, and of course, in the future, they could, eventually provide, electric and electric vehicles to the rest of the world. So they'll, of course, play a big role in kind of that. Yeah. So thank you, Professor.
Okay, anybody else have any questions, please jump in there with your hands up. One of the things I've learned from watching this carefully, I'll get to you in a second, Michael, is that it seems that the price of oil, the barrel, the Brent crude price of oil is very important in this whole situation. That is, that if the price was at 150 a barrel or higher for several months, the global ramifications of that would be very negative throughout the whole world. And to me, that seems to be one of the sort of limitations of Trump's ability to wage this conflict, because if it starts creeping up, it could have a deleterious effect not only on the global economy, but on the domestic economy in the United States, and further impede on his ability to, quote, I mean, he's doing his best. He's going to probably try another January 6th, a la screw up the midterms. But nevertheless, we know that that would have a negative effect on that. And I'm just wondering what your sense of this issue related to those macroeconomic questions are.
It is a world loss situation, so everyone loses, right? And the impact will be felt in the United States domestically. Think also about the conflict in Ukraine, where it's clear there are at least two impacts. One, the sanctions against Russia have been partially lifted, so Russia is actually making a lot of money. Plus, if we're looking at in the weapons supply chain, it's also not looking good for supplying Ukraine with, in particular, defensive aerial systems. So this is another example. Let's also not forget the impact on humanitarian aid delivery. The container prices have doubled. The World Food Programme, for instance, has a large depot in the Gulf, through which it usually feeds millions that are starving in Eastern Africa, South Sudan, Somalia, and so on. So this has also an effect on extremely vulnerable populations. Some countries, gain their entire electricity from oil. That includes small island states such as Seychelles and Mauritius. So
look at Cuba. Look at what's going on in Cuba.
No. The cost of living globally will rise. Inflation will be higher. So there, the first calculations are already out there. I mean, one number that I've heard is kind of like 2% less growth globally because of this war. So the macroeconomic perspective doesn't look good, and in many ways, every day counts. Right? That's the irony of all of that. We think, okay, whether it's another day or another week, but actually that matters a lot. Not only because of the question of how long companies in countries are actually hedged against oil price spikes, but also of how expensive oil and gas will be in the long run, and the more damage that is being done to the fields, to the infrastructure in the Gulf, the more dramatic this is going to get. Think about the attack on the Qatari field.
Right.
3 to 5 years, they said, until they can go back to normal. So
$20 billion worth of damage, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Extraordinary. Go on, Michael. Just have to unmute, Mike.
Yeah, excuse me. You'll have to forgive my voice. It's been given that, at least by my assessment of what's going on, the primary obstacles towards ending this situation are the United States and Iran. As at least at this point, I think Israel could end it now and still have achieved enough of a victory or enough of their objectives. But I think at this point, they have to dance to America's tune. So given that the United States has at least no clear stated objective as to what they want, at least as it would be per any negotiations that might go on, and Iran is basically pulling back on a non-negotiable stance at this point. It's really two questions. What, if anything, could be done to enable at least most of the shipping to get through the straits? What would have to be done? And also, the second question is, because you touched on non-fossil energy. So what would be, what is the situation with Europe? Because I would imagine what would happen after this is that there would be a greater push towards solar, wind energy, etc. What is Europe's situation now? How long would it be before Europe could wean themselves off of the dependence that they have on fossilized fuels? Do you think? I'm asking you to speculate. I apologize.
No, but it's important that we are speculating. So thank you for those questions. Part of the problem right now is that we are in this kind of stalemate where I think it's a classical situation of conflict entrapment, and I cannot really see who can mediate actually in the conflict right now. And both parties are also not ready to go back to the negotiation table. And that means shipping will not go through. So Iran has started to negotiate individual passages. So India, Pakistan, Indonesia have done so. There are reports that South Korea and Japan are also negotiating with the regime directly. But here we're looking about individual passages of ships, and that will be very, very tedious and slow, and it will not get us back to the 120 ships, but it will at least reduce the pressure on the countries that negotiate directly with Iran a little bit. So I expect this to continue. There's a discussion led by the International Maritime Organization to develop a sort of mechanism that we had in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But again, that's dependent on both belligerent states being at the table, right? So an IMO negotiated solution would mean that Iran is actually willing to develop such a mechanism, and quite frankly, at the moment, I cannot really see the incentives for Iran to do so. But the efforts are clearly important and needed, and perhaps in a week or in 2 weeks, such a mechanism can be established, and then we can also start looking into how can this look in the long run, 2 to 10 years along the line, because we're not just going back to normal. Right? Iran will keep the threat high, right? And shipping will need some reassurance mechanisms. On the European Union, that's quite obviously a big question. Because of the war in Ukraine, the green energy revolution was a little bit drawn back, but I expect this will change now. The investments in green energy, in particular in the North Sea offshore wind, are enormous. This will go a little bit faster, and it depends a little bit on where you are in Europe, so to say. In the northern countries, this will go really, really rapidly. But countries such as the Czech Republic and Hungary and so on, they are really behind and still quite dependent even on Russian gas. So I do hope that plans on a European Union level will speed up considerably as a consequence from the crisis.
All right. You have anything more, Michael?
No, that was a great answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Before I bring Alex in, I wanted to give you a chance to plug your book, Understanding Maritime Strategy. And I just was going to ask you, what made you write the book, and what did you come up with in terms of looking at that whole concept that's different from what people have done in the past?
So the starting point for the book is mainly that we have become much more dependent on the sea than we have been in the 1980s. And these shifts are really dramatic. And offshore wind is one example. Shipping, the crisis that we're seeing right now is one example. Many people also go on a cruise and so on. And together with this, the threat environment has substantially changed. We're looking at maritime terrorism. We're looking at different forms of blue crimes at sea. Piracy is the one that usually makes the headline, but there are many others. And the response to these new uncertainties and threats, that is the contemporary maritime security agenda. And this is what we discuss in great detail in the book, both in terms of what the threats are, how do states respond to, including through naval operations, but also through surveillance mechanism, maritime domain awareness systems, and so on. So the book is literally written as a comprehensive guide, so to say, to what maritime security today is. And I'm afraid we will have to update it soon to integrate the situation in the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, you got a couple of more chapters to add on to the next edition. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, so economic analyses I've read recently, again, they point out that, well, first off, this cutoff of oil is much larger than what happened in 1973, with Yom Kippur War oil embargo by the Saudis. And also, again, if we compare the size of the AI bubble currently, it's the analysis I saw that it's 4 times larger than the subprime mortgage bubble in 2008. That, of course, created the last great economic crisis. The only one bigger than that is, of course, the 1929 Great Depression. So I've seen a bunch of people argue that, well, if this cutoff of oil persists, with the effects on supply, but also again in terms of investment, that has a great likelihood of creating a second Great Depression. So I wonder what you think about that kind of analysis. Yeah, thank you, Professor.
Highly likely. I mean, I already called it a watershed moment, and the likelihood, the longer the strait remains closed, because let's not forget, if everyone decides tomorrow, we'll end the war, it doesn't mean that the strait will be open next day. Right? That will take weeks, if not months, and it would require an assurance mechanism and so on. So I think we are walking into this direction, and people usually know me as an optimist, right? But I find it hard to be an optimist over the last 3 weeks, not the least. In the first week, everyone said yeah, Trump will change his mind, declare victory, and then that was it. But that is not how things have played out. And even 2 weeks ago, there were strong arguments that this might lead to a major economic crisis, even because of the impact of one week. Now we are looking at 3 weeks, probably at months, all right? And the impact will be felt economically if it is the defining crisis of this decade economically. That waits to be seen. It's highly likely. It's the defining crisis of this decade politically, for sure. This we know already.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that when he goes back and forth with his sort of razzle-dazzle, oh, we're going to not do this, oh, we're not going to do that, he's very clearly looking at the market and watching the market go up and down and trying to, quote, keep that under control, if you will. Julian, go on, Julian.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question about international law. From my not that well informed observation of naval operations, in the last couple of centuries, especially among European countries, peacetime interdiction, the idea that you could use a navy in peacetime to slow down a country's economy by blocking its trade, Well, I mean, normally, if a country were to do interdiction, it would lead to war. I mean, going way back, to the Anglo-Dutch wars. Since the end of the Cold War, when the U.S. became, largely predominant, we started to see interdiction of North Korean vessels, and it basically, it's been escalating very, very quickly. The U.S. Navy intervenes a lot, but it also intervenes with other countries in joint pirate operations. Against state assets. I know the Canadian Navy participated in seizing a ship 10 years ago that was going from North Korea to Iran. And so in some ways, it looks like we see the erosion of international law. Now, I had a student of mine who looked at salvage rules as an indicator of, just one item of international law. And, the intuition is every time you have a new naval power, this new hegemon, they're going to define the rules. So, but what we found was because lawyers need legitimacy in courts. And if you look at the Napoleonic Wars of the War of 1812, the Americans and Brits spent a lot of time in court, even in the middle of war, basically, with claims against each other's vessels. So the world is probably more legalized in the past from a naval standpoint. I don't want to say more. I mean, it certainly is legalized today, but it had a bigger determinative impact in the 19th century, maybe because it was a multipolar environment. But what we saw with the salvage rules, because lawyers need legitimacy more than they need power, is the current laws are photocopies of the British law that are photocopies of the Dutch Grotian law, which comes from the Hanseatic League, which is basically a photocopy of what they were doing in Catalonia, which was basically copying what was going on in Andalusia. So I'm asking, are the events that we're observing indicating a massive change in the fundamental legal nature of maritime law?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the legal dimensions are super interesting here as well. I mean, to start with, we have to distinguish between international public and private law, right? So much of the question of salvage, insurance, that's in the spheres of private contract law. Last year we had two meetings, high-level meetings of the UN Security Council. At one, I actually had the pleasure to do a briefing, and in both of these meetings, over 150 states actually reassured the global community that they stand fully behind the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. That included China. China actually had emerged as a strong protagonist defending the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. You can guess for yourself who were the three countries that did not make strong statements in favor of the convention. Now, under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, states have committed to solve their disputes peacefully. So this is a fundamental principle, and that also means that everyone is committed to arbitration or bring their disputes towards international courts if it cannot be solved diplomatically on a bilateral level. This stands. Quite obviously, when we are looking at the situation in the Gulf right now, UNCLOS does not apply because it's a peacetime treaty, right? And now we are in wartime, so we are with the laws of naval warfare, and that is quite obviously a little bit more shaky field of international law. Here we're looking at the Geneva Conventions, but also at the expert manuals that have been written. For now, actually, I do not see a major transformation here. If it comes to interdiction, legally that has been, leaving aside the U.S. attacks in the Caribbean, which are legally questionable, different story. But much of that has been either under United Nations sanctions, right? If it comes to the Russian shipping fleet, a lot of it has been done under international environmental law. And the counter-piracy operations are quite obviously a completely different ballgame, because here we are looking at a universal crime that is extensively dealt with actually in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The Houthi attacks were a little bit more tricky beast, but here the argument was that it's actually self-defensive measures is also a little bit contested, but linked to also the unclear legal status of the Houthi forces directly. You know, are they non-state actors? Are they de facto state actors? Should they count as terrorist organizations? And so on. So the solution to run this via self-defense actually worked quite well. So there's always this talk about, you know, the decline of the rules-based order and so on. But actually, if you look at the realities on the ground and state practice, it's not necessarily the case. Yes, things have become a little bit more tricky, but that has always been the case. We should just, you know, drop the fantasy, you know, that everyone always follows the rule. It was never the case and it will never be the case. But the legal thicket that we have at sea is actually quite strong. So let's not forget that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Michael, go on, Michael.
Okay. I'm sorry, I may have to ask you to speculate again. What type of, given all of the, I mean, for all the seas and all the potential problems at sea, what would you say the type of shipbuilding, the types of ships that should be built? We know that Donald Trump wanted to build 100 battleships or something, which a lot of people, including myself, think is somewhat problematic. But what type of ships would need to be? How would this? What type of changes need to be done as far as shipbuilding, warships or commercial ships? How would these? What do you see as what changes should be done? Let's say, in order to put it this way, reduce the problems that could happen at sea.
That's the eternal question of naval strategy, quite obviously. If it comes to commercial vessels, there has been for a long time the tendency that bigger is better, right? But quite obviously, the shipping industry is also confronted with the need to decarbonize and develop an appropriate climate change regime. So that probably will imply that ships will get smaller again, and many future forward-looking scenarios also include that we're actually moving to a bit more regionalized short shipping system in the long run, because the vulnerabilities of the current shipping system have been brought to the fore now a couple of times, and the Evergreen accident was actually the first point that showed everyone, okay, now we are currently running the system is not necessarily the most effective and for sure not the most climate friendly. If it comes to warships, the big question is what can navies actually do, right? And there we have these different spectrums of tasks, right? For the United States, yes, that will continue to be the option to stage an invasion somewhere. For many countries around the world, it will rather imply literal ships and small hulls rather than big ones. A good example is India, for instance. India has recognized that they are not gonna successfully compete in the naval arms race with China and the United States. So now they have come up with a plan to build the largest coast guard of the world. And that is in many ways smart, because let's not forget that we are now in this age of gray zone warfare, where the majority of threats are ambiguous. They're about, provocations from fishing fleets. They're about cyber attacks. They're about sabotage of critical underwater infrastructure. They're about missiles, drones, and so on. So the question, what kind of Coast Guard ships we need in the future, I think is super important, because many of these gray zone threats, short of war, are better addressed to Coast Guards rather than navies. So I think this is the strategic discussion that we need to have. Is it actually better to have warships or to have launch-ships? Right? And for the gray zone spectrum, my answer would be launch-ships. It would be the White Hulls. So let's see in what kind of direction this is moving. But I think India has done a very smart move here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Alex, you have the last question. Go on, Alex.
Well, first I want to give anybody else, Aaron.
No, we've got. Remember,
you want to ask a question?
Christian is at a conference. We don't want to keep him from the conference.
Okay. Yeah. So my question I want to ask about, shipbuilding, which is that, of course, again, the great American shipbuilding industry, which was, after the Second World War, has, disappeared. And, if we compare, naval shipbuilding, American shipbuilding is, much less than what the Chinese are doing right now. And of course, that's all connected with the overall shift of not just the United States, but the kind of West in general, away from, an industrial focused economy to more of a financial based economy, and to real deindustrialization in large parts of the West. So, again, I take what you, I think it's important what you say again about, this need for more ships and shipbuilding. But how can we do that again if we don't kind of reverse this, neoliberalization, this financialization of our economies, and return to basically again industrial based economic system? Thank you, Professor.
Another big question, and of course linked to what how is shipping going to look like in the future. I think de-riskification in terms of supply chains is one of the long-term consequences of the current war. So probably it might actually happen that we are regionalizing markets and so on. Does the United States need a large shipbuilding industry? Well, if you're preparing for World War III, the answer is yes, absolutely. If you don't want that to happen, probably it's not an urgent priority. South Korea builds fantastic ships. The shipbuilding industry in India is thriving. So I don't see the urgent need actually for bringing this industry back. It's rather a question of maintaining good relationships with shipbuilding countries such as South Korea and India. So that would be for me the priority here. It takes a long time to restore such an industry, and it's also about the innovation base, the decarbonized vessels, hydrogen technology. There's this entire research and innovation environment that is actually required, and what I see happening in the United States at the moment is quite obviously the opposite direction. The future grade hydrogen engine probably will not come out of the United States, but from other countries.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Again, it'd be interesting to have a completely separate discussion with you on this subject at another time. Go on, Julian.
Sorry, very quick question. For me, this is a rehearsal for the U.S. egging Indonesia to blockade the Strait of Malacca, and South Africa resisting an American blockade of the Cape of Good Hope in the event of a war over Taiwan. China blockades Taiwan, the U.S. blockades China. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that would be even a further world loss situation. it's a little bit different because let's not forget the Strait of Hormuz. You don't have any alternatives, right? Shipping cannot choose an alternative path. While with the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Taiwan, you can always sail around, right? So that changes the picture a little bit.
I'm not sure if the Chinese can. I mean, their tankers already go through the Strait of Lombok because Malacca is not deep enough. If the U.S. were to block those two, I mean, China's economy is obviously enormous, but it's of course it's not the only country to have a service go through the Strait of Malacca. I mean, for me, it would be a bigger version of what we're seeing now. But perhaps it wouldn't be. I mean, it's obviously complicated because it's more multipolar. It's not just Iran. Thank you.
But it's thank you for bringing up future horror scenarios. It's
your job to anticipate them.
It's good to keep them in mind. But for me, it's always quite important that we maintain a solid spectrum of scenarios, which stretches from the horror scenarios to kind of like us living in a bright future, because the reality will be or should be somewhere in between. And the more we are inclined to only move towards the worst case scenarios, that of course brings us on a trajectory where the future looks less bright than it could be. So it's quite important actually to maintain both types of scenarios on our horizon.
Yeah, well, of course, there's always learning. Thank you very much.
Well, yes, thank you, Christian. And I know you're going to have to rewrite your Understanding Maritime Strategy, but what are you working on now?
So we don't have to rewrite it. We are probably
add a little bit to it there.
Exactly. So there's much of it was actually anticipated in one way or the other. So we were quite happy looking at the book. So whoever wants to have a solid foundation in maritime security, it makes a good read.
Yes.
We're working indeed on the second edition. But right now, one of my main projects looks into information sharing and the rise of new surveillance technology at sea. So there's one project. Another one is starting to look into Coast Guards, Coast Guard capabilities, what Coast Guards actually can do, drawing exactly on this Indian lesson, but also the question of what does the gray zone spectrum of threats actually mean, and how can we encounter it? And then the last thing that keeps me busy is the question of the future of naval mine warfare, because there we are seeing not only the current Iranian threat, but quite a number of countries are investing heavily in smart mines, and that will also have dramatic impact on both warfare at sea more generally, but also maritime security. So there's a lot of interesting questions attached to these. So I will keep on being busy, not only in the current crisis, but also in the future.
I can see. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out for being at that conference in Columbus, Ohio today. And hopefully we'll have you on again soon to talk about this very interesting subject. Thank you so much for doing that book, Understanding Maritime Strategy. Absolutely fascinating. For those of us who are, as I say, students of Alfred Thermahan and Julian Corbett and all Bernard Brody, all these other guys, it's a very enlightening read. And I want to thank you so much for doing that. Thanks again, Christian. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.